What if the mythic Dawn failed? What if they did not successfully assassinate Uriel Septim VII at the start of Oblivion? What if instead the prisoner jumped in the way and defended the Emperor until the Blades could come and assist? What if the Emperor lived and the Dragonfires were never extinguished? The Oblivion crisis never happened. How vastly different would the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim be? The Fourth Era, if it would still even be called the Fourth Era, would be a time of a very different Tamriel. Welcome back to FudgeMuppet, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Scott, and today in this alternate history experiment, we are looking at what would have happened to the timeline if the Mythic Dawn cult failed in their plot and the Oblivion crisis never happened. Before we move on, a quick disclaimer. I understand that in reality, due to things like the butterfly effect and all that, the slightest changes would make the world ridiculously different with innumerable variables, but for the sake of this fun alternate history experiment, we are going to assume things go on with relative normalcy so we still have an Elder Scrolls timeline that is somewhat recognizable. But also, to keep it spicy and entertaining, we're going to have to take a few creative liberties when it comes to certain decisions. Now we have the ground rules set, let's get down to it. So let's start with the context. We are talking about the events of the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion. Right there in the very beginning of the game, Uriel Septim VII is killed by the Mythic Dawn, and he tasks you with taking the Amulet of Kings to Joffrey. From there, you are tasked with finding his illegitimate son and only surviving heir, Martin Septim. The main story plays out, and ultimately you thwart the Mythic Dawn's plot of unleashing Mehrunes Dagon onto Tamriel, but ultimately Martin Septim sacrifices himself by destroying the Amulet of Kings and becoming an avatar of Akatosh, which then defeats the Daedric Prince. Day is saved, but the problem for tomorrow is that there is no heir to the throne. The Septim bloodline has ended. Ultimately, this Oblivion crisis would undoubtedly be one of the greatest catalysts for change on Tamriel since the Septim Empire's inception. You are likely familiar with the events that follow the crisis and lead up to the events of Skyrim in the 201st year of the Fourth Era. The creation of the Mede Dynasty, the Thalmor's rise to power and formation of the Aldmeri Dominion, and of course the preceding Great War. But if at that fateful moment at the start of Elder Scrolls IV never happens and instead the prisoner manages to save Uriel VII, what happens then? Let's dive right in and get theorizing. So in this alternate timeline, the prisoner and would-be hero of Kvatch saves the Emperor from the Mythic Dawn assassin. For this, he is congratulated and honored. He has clearly earned his freedom. The Emperor, accompanied by Boris and the prisoner, travel in secret to Cloudruler Temple. Here the prisoner is offered the opportunity to train as a member of the Blades and officially join the Order. So a different start to the Oblivion you know. Undoubtedly, the Mythic Dawn would not just give up then and there. There would be multiple more attempts on the Emperor's life and attempts to fulfill Menkar Cameron's plans, and they could arguably succeed, but that would kind of defeat the purpose of this video. What if the Emperor survived? He was assassinated 3 days later. The end. Not a very good alternate timeline. So for this thought experiment, we are maintaining that the Mythic Dawn 100% fail. Uriel Septim survives. Okay, so where does that leave us? Well, you still have to consider that all of his official heirs are dead, as is said right as they first enter the prison cell at the start of Oblivion. That includes Geldol, Enman, and Ebel Septim. This is a problem for any dynasty. An emperor needs an heir, and there is one hidden option still: his illegitimate son, Martin, a priest in Kvatch. Well, what I think would happen is that Uriel sends for Martin and brings him into the fold, legitimizing him as a successor and heir, Martin Septim. This would be to great advantage because Martin would be able to meet his father and also learn from him directly about statecraft and rulership. Additionally, Martin may bring new perspective to the position of emperor as he was born a commoner and could take that experience to better relate to the people he rules. To a degree. So the Dragonfires remain lit, Uriel Septim is alive, and after the Mythic Dawn has been dealt with by the Blades, he returns to the Imperial City with his newfound son, Martin Septim. This is rather controversial though. You see, in the original timeline, Cyrodiil was desperate for a man of dragon blood to take the throne because a Daedric apocalypse was imminent. However, in this timeline, there is no looming Daedric threat, which changes things. Many may question the legitimacy of Martin's septum, proposing that it's rather convenient that all Uriel's heirs are assassinated and then all of a sudden a secret son comes out of the woodwork. Some distant members of the septum family, cousins and such, may lay claim to the throne. I think ultimately the Elder Council has benefited from Uriel Septum's rule, as Tamriel at this point in history is the most prosperous and secure it has been since its inception. Morrowind has been secured, the tribunal gods deposed, and High Rock is the most peaceful it has ever been. All the provinces are firmly in control of the Empire. Of course, in the real timeline, the Oblivion crisis shakes the whole boat, but with no crisis, there is no withdrawal of the provincial legions to Cyrodiil, the Empire remains whole, and there is no widespread devastation and destruction. Well, there will be some destruction soon, but we'll get to that. The Emperor's new proclamation of Martin as his heir may stir up some factions in the background. They may wish to support another septum. Also, as an aside, this kinda reveals the plot hole of Oblivion, where there should be other septum heirs, whether that be a distant cousin, uncle, or otherwise. I'll link a video down below called The Septum Lie, which delves into the mechanics of the dragon blood and explores the Septum dynasty, but long story short, none of the entire Septum dynasty beyond Pelagius I and his parents were direct descendants of Tiber Septum. After Pelagius was assassinated, Tiber Septum's niece Kintyra became empress. So really, most of the Septum dynasty were direct descendants of Tiber Septum's brother, Agnerith. That is until you get to a certain point in the Third Era where the line breaks and the title of Emperor is handed off to a distant member of the family who was more politically favourable, Sepphoris II. So, point is, without the urgency of having to crown an heir to prevent the Oblivion crisis, it's entirely possible that a cousin could press claim to the throne. So while Martin Septum is successfully proclaimed and groomed as an heir, disenfranchised extended families and disgruntled factions may surface when Uriel Septum passes. But back on track for now. Mythic Dawn thwarted, Martin declared successor, Uriel Septum lives and rules Tamriel at the ripe old age of 76, so he might not have much left in the tank and he will have to deal with at least one more major crisis before he passes to Aetherius. I'm also going to refer to the timeline as the Third Era, because without the end of the Septum dynasty, there is no real reason to proclaim the Fourth Era, so we will continue from the year 433 of the Third Era, for the same amount of time it takes to get to Skyrim. So this alternate Elder Scrolls V Skyrim would be set in the year 634 of the Third Era instead of year 201 of the Fourth Era. We on the same page? Cool. Let's move on. The eruption of Red Mountain is inevitable at this point. The Nerevarine prophecy was fulfilled, the Tribunal are no more, Vivec no longer possesses the power to hold back Bardau, and by the year 438 of the Third Era, attempts at sustaining the Celestial Rock have failed, and it comes crashing down onto the city of Vivec, causing the following eruption of Red Mountain, the beginning of an event that would be known as the Red Year. As you all know, this occurs in the real timeline, but in this alternate Tamriel, how does the response to this devastation differ? For starters, the Dunmer people themselves would be in a much better position to handle the devastation because they hadn't just been assaulted by the Oblivion crisis. Additionally, they would have the support of the Imperial legions in the relief effort. Still, Vvardenfell is blown open, Scathing Bay boils where the city Vivec once lay, and Morrowind is choked by ash. Dunmer refugees are going to flood out into places like Skyrim, leading to the creation of the Shrine to Azura and the formation of the Grey Quarter in Windhelm. Solstheim would likely still be gifted to the Dunmer by the High King of Skyrim, but overall Morrowind is still left in a pretty grim position. Additional Imperial support has been sent to help with the relief effort, but this is not the last assistance the Dunmer will need. Soon after the devastation of the Red Year, the Argonians seize this opportunity and begin a bloody campaign across Morrowind, ravaging the southern lands. In the real timeline, the Argonians only have to face a Morrowind reeling from disaster and with no or limited outside support. Though things may differ this time because the Imperial garrisons never left Morrowind. Of course, the Empire would try and stop this conflict, as Blackmarsh is also one of their provinces, but to clarify, Blackmarsh, like Morrowind, was mostly acquired via treaty, meaning Tiber Septim didn't march into the center of the land and take it all via military conquest. Blackmarsh is a land for Argonians to thrive, a place where many other races do the opposite. They get sick and die due to the noxious environment only suited to lizard kind. Because of this, the Empire does not have as strict control over Blackmarsh's inner workings. The Empire would help in the defense of Morrowind, and at the same time they would try and exert control over Blackmarsh, pressuring border cities that they would have more direct control over to help quell the Anaxil, the nationalistic political party likely behind the invasion. Ultimately, southern Morrowind is ravaged, but nowhere near as much as it was in the real timeline. Mournhold is not successfully sacked, and houses Tilvani and Dress survive with much more of their holdings intact, though they still suffer considerable losses. This also fundamentally changes Morrowind's future. House Redoran never plays the save the day role, at least to the same degree, which robs them of some of the political gain they possessed in the real timeline. King Helseth still lives, and he uses this invasion to double down on the ban of slavery, demonstrating that these hostile conflicts are caused by the hatred resulting from past slavery, and that Morrowind needs a time of peace. House Dress and Telvanni will still partake in slavery for a time, albeit illegally. With the fall of the Tribunal, House Indoral's power wanes considerably, and even more so than in the real timeline. You see, before when the Tribunal fell, the conventional move was to the Reclamation, ancient worship of the good Daedra, and the priesthood survived to this way. However, with the lasting imperial influence, on top of the fact that their Tribunal gods have recently been proven false, many Dunmer would convert to the Nine Divines rather than worship the Daedra of old. I imagine this change would be very prevalent among the members of House Hlalu and the monarchy. House Hlalu, by the way, because of their imperial connections, would undoubtedly be the most powerful great house in all of Morrowind, followed by House Redoran. In this alternate timeline, worship would be split between the Reclamations and the Nine Divines, with certain houses and geographical locations leaning one way. This could eventually lead to some religious conflicts and small wars that could provide problems in the long term. Future generations would become more and more imperialized, though. In regards to Blackmarsh, the Anaxil remain a political party within its depths, but with its failed invasion and the scars it left on their reputation with the rest of Tamriel, it cannot successfully push all of Blackmarsh into a permanent secession. With the Empire helping enforce Helseth's ban on slavery, radicalization of Argonians may be harder in the future, likely leading to more stability in the region. But let's speak about Elsewhere, which also seceded in the early 4th era. Well, in this alternate timeline, with a strong and firm empire and with no Oblivion crisis, I don't see how they would secede. See, the main reasons for many provinces separating in the real timeline was because they take advantage of the Oblivion crisis. The Empire wasn't really in the position to stop them. They were dealing with the aftermath and also the power struggle that was the Stormcrown Interregnum, not to mention the rise of the Thalmor causing problems in the Elven territories. So now we're at the year 443 of the 3rd era, or as it would be in the real timeline, year 10 of the 4th era. Uriel Septim dies in his bed, age 86. Emperor Martin Septim is crowned, but this was not a smooth coronation. A series of failed assassinations and coups are made against him, but with the guidance of High Chancellor Okato, Martin Septim perseveres. The new Emperor Martin Septim had been married to the daughter of the High King in Skyrim, who bore him 2 children, Kintyra and Thonica. While all is well for now, Martin Septim is not his father, and he relies on Chancellor Okato for guidance. However, this will be a problem. In the original timeline, Chancellor, or rather Potentate Okato, is assassinated. Now, the Thalmor are suspected to be behind it, though we can't rule out other potential causes. In this alternate timeline, we are going to run with Chancellor Okato being assassinated, and this could be to do with the aforementioned groups who wish to see what they would see as a real Septim on the throne. The death of Okato will be for Martin like having the training wheels ripped off. He will have to succeed without him, but remember, he still has the incredibly loyal service of the Blades, which he will have to leverage when maneuvering future politics. In the years following, like in the real timeline, Nova Orsinium is attacked by combined Redguard and Breton forces. However, in this alternate timeline, Martin Septim intervenes with Imperial legions dispatched to quell the issue. Nova Orsinium still stands, and Martin gains a powerful ally in Gortwog Gronagorm. Why? Well, Uriel Septim VII was reviewing the appeal for provincial status, and Martin Septim, in the aftermath of this attempted sacking, finally officially recognizes Orsinium as an imperial province and grants them official contracts for the mass production of Legion equipment, which screws over some of the same Breton and Redguard kingdoms that allied to attack Orsinium in the first place. This was quite a controversial move, but Martin wants to make it clear that peace is the best option, and he will not tolerate wars being waged. Not everyone sees eye to eye on this though. There will be no instability like the Stormcrown interregnum of the real timeline, but it seems Martin has gained some allies while losing others, as is the nature of politics. Meanwhile, in the Somerset Isles, the Thalmor have been a faction actively trying to call for radical change, though without the Oblivion crisis to take credit for ending, they have less sway, and so they are unable to successfully overthrow the Ultima monarchy, though at the same time they have managed to stir unrest throughout the land, and Somerset is rather fragile, but because the Thalmor are still trying to gain power in Somerset, it is unlikely that they would be able to back the coup in Valenwood, meaning the Imperial-backed government remains, hence stability for the Empire remains. By the year 463 of the Third Era in this alternate timeline, equivalent to year 30 of the Fourth Era in the real timeline, Emperor Martin Septim has ruled for 20 years, and despite his best efforts, the nature of his succession to the throne has left a more turbulent Tamriel. He is incredibly popular with the common people, but it is the nobles that he often has trouble in winning over. Skyrim has remained a strong backbone of the Empire, especially with his marriage to the daughter of the High King, but his decision to officiate Orsinium has threatened relations with Wayrest and High Rock, along with others. Of course, I can't sit here making up hundreds of different intricate political relations. This needs to be a reasonable sized video, and we still have 170 years to go, so we might glaze over a few more details. Emperor Martin Septim dies of health complications, year 473. His eldest daughter is crowned Empress Kintyra Septim II, and her first year of rule would not be uneventful. The floating island Umbriel appears over Blackmarsh and makes its way to Morrowind. The plots of the two books, Infernal City and Lord of Souls, play out, but instead of Atribus Mead, we may have Atribus Septim, Kintyra II's oldest son. The events would play out similarly, and the crisis is averted. Atribus Septim would gain great renown, and he would become a popular emperor in the year 498 of the Third Era. During his reign, Atribus Septim managed to return stability of Tamriel to a state that of his great-grandfather Uriel Septim VII left it in, though in the background the Thalmor have been operating in the shadows, spreading dissent and plotting. While they may have not managed to control Somerset or establish the Aldmeri Dominion, they are still working towards that goal. Year 515 of the Third Era, Atribus' son, Martin Septim II, is crowned, and years later, year 531, the Void Nights occur, and the moons Massa and Secunda disappear for 2 years. This wreaks havoc for the Ghajiit, who depend on the moons for their births and way of life. No one can figure out why they vanished, but 2 years later they mysteriously return, and the Thalmor take credit for their reappearance. Now, this is disbelieved by many, but among certain factions within Elsewhere, they believe the elves and are grateful. The Thalmor use this influence to encourage Anaquina to declare independence from the Confederacy, causing the split, forming the ancient kingdoms of Anaquina and Palantine once again. Elsewhere is very unstable, with the kingdom of Anaquina being led by a nationalistic faction desiring independence from the Empire, encouraged by the Thalmor, and Palantine remains imperial-backed. This conflict would continue for many years, but eventually Anaquina would be overwhelmed and reintegrated as a vassal state of the Empire. However, Anaquina would remain full of dissenters and rebels for decades to come. Let's fast forward a little bit, because without the Aldmeri Dominion and Thalmor control, the Empire has no major opponents and no great war, making the next decades rather uneventful, besides the occasional uprising here and there or territorial dispute. Typical happenings of an expansive multi-ethnic empire, but nothing major. Let's have a look at some of the implications of no great war and how that changes things. With no great war, we obviously don't have continent-wide devastation, as well as all the costs of rebuilding, building, and to the potential famines and poverty that could ensue. The Reachmen are never able to opportunistically take Markarth, hence no Markarth incident. There is also no white gold concordat, meaning no banning of Talos worship, and interestingly, it seems the Dark Brotherhood may survive better. The implications from Cicero's journals, to me at least, seem that the destruction of various sanctuaries was because of the lack of stability in cities following the Great War. For example, the seizing of the city of Wayrest by Corsairs, or violent gang wars erupting in Breville. Without the Great War to allow for this instability, I think that the cities would remain relatively safe, and the Dark Brotherhood would be able to continue thriving as they had, meaning that the Sanctuary in Skyrim won't be the last bastion of assassins running around without the Night Mother. So this all brings us to Skyrim, the Elder Scrolls V. What would it be like without the Oblivion crisis muddling all the events of the past 200 years? You would be playing in a Tamriel that all still belongs to the Empire, but Alduin is still returning and we need a Dragonborn savior to defeat him. Just as an aside, I want to have a quick chat about prophecy. People pointed out in the Dagoth video that the prophecy from Alduin's Wall talks about various conditions of Alduin's return, such as Skyrim is sundered and bleeding, a civil war. Now, I'm going to play along with this because we want an interesting plot for the Elder Scrolls V. However, I would just like to point out that prophecies are not always true or play out like prophesized. For example, many failed incarnates of the Nerevarine rose to fulfill the prophecy and then died. Or you could look at the prophecy created by Archcurate Vyther. The fact of the matter is, in the Merethic era during the Dragon Wars, Alduin was sent forward in time with an Elder Scroll, and he is going to arrive regardless of what Akaviri craftsmen wrote on a wall at the end of the First Era. In addition, it's also believed that the prophecy itself originated from an Elder Scroll, and Elder Scrolls are ever-changing and do not present the necessary future, but a potential one. Here is a quote from the book Fragment Divining the Elder Scrolls. The Elder Scrolls themselves can pierce the veil. They offer a view of the flux of time itself. The prophet who reads the scroll sees one version of what might be. Another prophet might have a different vision with equal veracity. So essentially, prophecies are not set in stone, but are based upon potential futures. Also, as the Elder Scrolls are sensitive to the very flux of time, they would witness the changes and essentially update their visions or prophecies. For example, if the Oblivion crisis doesn't happen, a more current reading of an Elder Scroll may tell a different story to the one that was etched into a wall over 1,000 years ago. Anyways, doing these alternate histories, we are bound to run into more prophecies, but like I said, an alternate Elder Scrolls V would still benefit from some political turmoil to keep it spicy. So, big change number one is that you as a Dragonborn is not necessary. One way of looking at the sudden appearance of the last Dragonborn is that Akatosh chose someone to receive the blessing because he needed a hero to stop Alduin. But in this alternate timeline, there is still a line of Dragonborn emperors. The dragon blood still remains. In this alternate timeline, we have Emperor Pelagius Septim V, the grandson of Martin Septim II. The year is 634 of the Third Era, and Skyrim has been consumed by strife. The quote of the prophecy in regards to Skyrim is, "When the snow tower lies sundered, kingless, bleeding, the World-Eater wakes, and the wheel turns upon the last Dragonborn." In this alternate timeline, the High King Torrig has been assassinated by an unknown. Accusations have been cast across the land at various Jarls or people who could gain from this. The Emperor Pelagius Septim V has come for the funeral for the High King, but the moot to choose the next king is undecided, and two factions have arisen. To the east, we have Ulfric Stormcloak, who believes that the Empire had Torrig assassinated because he was sympathetic to nationalistic independence-seeking Nords. The east of Skyrim joins Ulfric in the civil war against the Empire loyalists of western Skyrim. Ulfric wishes to see a free land that returns to its roots and restores the old Nordic pantheon. He resents the imperialization of faith and culture that has occurred over the last centuries, and the Empire killing the High King was the last straw. Now, of course, this isn't a real game, so I'm just going to spoil it all. As you play through, you would discover the Thalmor plot. In this timeline, as we've said, there is no Aldmeri Dominion, but we still have the Thalmor's agenda and their agents trying to break the Empire from within. So you find out that the Thalmor actually orchestrated the assassination of the High King by using a defected member of the Blades. Unfortunately, the civil war is in full swing by this time. You would be able to help either side of the war, or you may be able to play the diplomatic route, and depending on how much evidence you acquired throughout the playthrough, you may be able to reveal the truth and reconcile the factions with some major concessions here and there. I think it would be an interesting interesting thread if you were not the Dragonborn either, but rather the Emperor or his children, perhaps a prince or princess, are required to defeat Alduin, with your help of course. This complicates the civil war dynamic further because everyone needs the Emperor or his children to prevent Alduin from consuming the world. Maybe the Emperor is assassinated by the Dark Brotherhood, further complicating the matter, but ultimately this civil war in Skyrim is in an attempt to fit in with the prophecy. In all likelihood, there is no reason for a civil war if there was no White God Concordat or Altmeri Dominion. The reality is that if the Oblivion crisis never happened, Tamriel would be a far, far better place, albeit likely a less interesting place. But that, ladies and gentlemen, is an alternate timeline where the Oblivion crisis never happened. And remember, this is one potential alternate timeline. With so many variables, there are many possibilities, but we need to create these videos with a bit of direction. Regardless, we aren't saying this is the definitive alternate scenario, but it's just one that we think would be likely. Let me know what you think down in the comments below, and please do request other alternate history scenarios that you would love to see explored. Give the video a like if you enjoyed. My name is Scott from FudgeMuppet, and I'll be back to nerd out with you again next time.